Hey up, right, I've got some rather startling news for you today that I think, if nothing else, proves very much that within the next 10 years the ability to travel using your own personal transport, those days are going to end. If things continue as they are. Now, there's just something I want to address before we get onto this parking issue for EVs in London. British motorists are sleepwalking into sort of transport poverty in this country. And I think the naivety of your average British motorist and motorcyclist is quite worrying. Now, I get hundreds of comments a month from guys that believe that they can keep their existing petrol car or motorcycle, they can maintain it on the road for the next 20 or 30 years, and they're going to be okay. This move to EVs is not going to affect them. And I'll tell you now, that is not going to happen. If things continue the way they are, within 10 years, you will find that you will be unable to buy petrol. ULEZ zones are going to expand so that it's going to be impossible for you to ride anywhere. And as EVs reach sort of 40% of the road traffic, obviously 40 or 50% of the petrol stations are going to close down because they'll have fewer customers. And by 2035 there will be so few petrol vehicles left on the road that there will be no petrol stations. All you're going to have will be diesel stations intended to service heavy haulage, most of which will be on the motorways, and you will be unable to find petrol, let alone find petrol at an affordable price. The government knows what it's doing. It's got you stitched up like a kipper. By all means, keep your motorbike for as long as you possibly can, but eventually it's just going to become an oversized paperweight. Now, the same goes for all you cyclists and tree huggers who believe that this is going to provide you with a utopian future where you can ride around in gay abandon without worrying about traffic, or your children can play on the streets without worrying about being run over. But be careful what you wish for, because the UK motorist is the lifeblood of the UK economy, and the demise of the motorist will result in an exponential rise in the cost of everything from food to services. Your cost of living will go through the ceiling. Now, as with all ridiculous stories, this story starts in London. First, I've got to admit, it did make me giggle a little bit that the electric vehicle owner was going to get hit with such huge parking charges, but then I thought about it, because really, it's not funny. Most EV owners have bought electric vehicles because they believe that they're serving the planet, they're doing what's good for future generations. And if ever you required proof that that is a fallacy, this is it. Now, this story sort of relates to an announcement by the Westminster Council, a Labour-led council. Also, these measures have been rolled out in Islington and at least one other council area in London. And what starts in London has a habit of spreading everywhere else, we know that. For several years now, I've been making videos trying to explain the truth about electric vehicles, that the carbon footprint is actually much bigger than an ICE equivalent over the course of its lifetime. The reason being, a lot more resources are required to build an electric vehicle. They are much heavier, so tyre dust and brake dust is more of a problem than it is with an ICE vehicle. They cause more wear and tear on the roads than an ICE vehicle. And of course, they don't last as long, because they will only last as long as the batteries last. And replacing the batteries is prohibitively expensive, so these vehicles tend to get scrapped, or will be scrapped, earlier than an ICE equivalent. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that electric vehicles are a huge environmental disaster in the making. Even though our UK government has a dedicated page on their website explaining that none of this is true. Only it is true. Listen. Up until recently, the EV owner has had it pretty damn good. The government initially were supporting them with subsidies, which have now been removed. Charging them was cheap, but now the price of electricity's gone up and they are comparable with petrol, even more expensive than petrol and diesel depending on where you're charging them. Zero road tax. And of course they're exempt from ULEZ and zero emission zones all over the country because they're electric. There were even some perks with cheap parking because they're electric cars. But all that is about to change, and it's about to change in a big way. Now, something very important happened at the beginning of this month, January 2024. The ZEV, or Zero Emissions Vehicle Mandate, came into force. That was essentially the last nail in the coffin for the internal combustion engine. Because from the 1st of January 2024, manufacturers of motor vehicles are required to sell a specific percentage of EVs compared to internal combustion engine vehicles, and that percentage is set to increase year on year so that by 2030, 80% of all vehicles sold must be electric vehicles. And if those manufacturers get it wrong and they sell too many petrol vehicles, they will be charged £15,000 per vehicle oversold. The trap was set back in 2020 by Boris Johnson. The hapless, sleepwalking UK motorist walked into the trap and it has now sprung. And these Labour councils know that because all three are Labour councils. And they've realised that there's no longer any need to keep up any form of pretence. Now, it's bad enough what our current government, the Conservatives, have done in putting all of this in place, but the shadow government, which is a Labour government, has made it quite clear that if and when it gets into power this year or next year, one of the first things it's going to do is speed up the schedule for getting rid of the ICE cars, and that they're going to bring the banning date back to 2030 instead of the current 2035. Now, over the last few years, both the current government and the shadow government have been sort of misleading us into believing that, okay, we're going to have to give up the internal combustion engine, but it's going to be replaced with the electric car, which will be just as good. Well, almost as good. Well, actually not almost as good, nowhere near as good, but, you know, at least you'll have something. But that was a red herring. The intention was that electric cars were going to be too inconvenient and too expensive for your average working man and woman, and so actually we would have to give up our internal combustion engine and then just go without, because now what they're going to do here is clobber electric vehicle owners with super high parking charges, approximately 1,800% higher than they're currently used to pay. Yes, you heard that right, it wasn't a mispronunciation. 1,800% higher than the current parking charges for an electric vehicle in Westminster and other Labour-led councils. Currently, EVs can park in certain areas of Westminster for as little as 96 pence for a 4-hour stay. But new proposals which are set to come into force in April of this year, the beginning of the new financial year, the Westminster Council is going to scrap the ability of the EV owner to do that, and the charge will increase to £18.80 for a 4-hour period. So if you're having to park there for the day to go to work, it will cost the average EV owner £36.96 to park up just to go to work. And get this, a spokesman for the Westminster Council has cited that this increase charge is emissions based. I'll read out what the Westminster Council had to say about this. Justifying its decision in the document, the council said that the existing charging structure was unsustainable with the rapid growth of EVs, and an emission-based approach would future-proof the service. This Westminster document went on to say, In outlining its decision, the council said that a higher charge was to cover larger EVs, SUVs and sports cars which have a significant carbon imprint from the production and the recycling of the batteries. The council also explained that bigger batteries meant larger and heavier vehicles which took up more space and caused more wear and tear on the road. Now, I don't think they've really considered the optics of this because, you know, for the past 3 or 4 years they've been telling us that electric vehicles are the saviour of the earth. They are less polluting than ICE vehicles, yet here they're clearly stating that during the lifetime of these vehicles, from construction to scrapping, they are more damaging to the environment than an ICE car. There's no other way you can interpret that. They're also admitting that the heavy weight of these vehicles is causing more environmental damage than an ICE car is. The evidence for this has been available for a long time, and EV owners have walked right into this one. Now, there's quite a long article about this in the Telegraph. I mean, it's pretty much the same article in any newspaper you can think of, but I'll leave the one for the Telegraph. Do a bit of research and read up on it from there. This is real. It's not an April Fool's joke. This is what they intended all along, to price every motorist off the road. I warned about this a couple of years ago, and you know, it's hard not to feel smug, but I did tell you something like this was coming. This was never about the environment and saving the planet. This has always been about controlling movement and getting rid of personal motorised transport. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, and if you're not a subscriber but you'd like to be kept abreast about these sort of developments, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell and ensure that your notifications are enabled. There are, of course, other ways that you can assist this channel, either through my patrons page or through the super thanks button down below. Either way, your assistance and your support is much appreciated. I am, of course, going to be back on Friday, so until then, please, ride safely, and I'll see you soon.